Hello, everybody. This is Future Business Forum, episode 6, and this is Rachel, Tristan, and Brian. I'm going to get the other guys to introduce themselves as normal, and we're going to be rambling once more this week on a subject that we've only just agreed on. So, Rachel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Brian. So I'm Rachel Dempers, and I'm an HR consultant around the future of work and executive coach.
And I'm Tristan Allen, founder at room44.co.uk, based in Milton Keynes in the UK. We are innovation strategists, and we help companies to imagine and envisage and plan for what they're going to be rather than what they are.
And I'm Brian Wright, who founder and director of Yellow Yo-Yo, and we're a brand strategy, futures and strategy and design business with a bit of marketing sprinkling in, and we help people make their brands irresistible. And we're going to talk about how you find the truth in news, how you disseminate what's true in the world, how you filter things. Because there is so much at the moment that we're being told about so many different things that are impacting us. And we were having a conversation just before we press the go button on record about how you tell what's true or not. And I was saying how I've started during the pandemic reading the New York Times, because they do a very, very nice thing they send out every day. And it was really interesting to read something about Great Britain, England, or our country by another country, and they look at it in a very different way than the papers over here or the magazines over here. What do you guys think?
Well, we were talking as Brian's just said, and I was just referring to an article that I'd read in the Guardian Weekly this week, which brought to mind the fact that social media channels have changed the way we consume news and insight massively over the last few years. So back in the day, when we used to have in the UK BBC and ITV were our only two forms of televised media, and the papers all had a known bias, so the Telegraph was right wing, etc. We knew where we would go to read our news of choice, and now that we don't do that so much anymore, the social media channels like WhatsApp, like Snapchat, are being used to disseminate propaganda depending on whose agenda you choose to follow. And going back to Brian's opening comments, it's really hard to know what's true and what's not, and picking the truth or choosing the truth that suits you and your biases the best has actually become quite a complex matter. But in business, of course, we don't want a biased view. We want to know what's factual, so we can make decisions on it. And I think the way in which management are being asked or really have to respond to insight today is just extraordinarily difficult. It's kind of why the three of us are here. And we'll talk a bit more about this in different detail afterwards. Rachel?
Yeah.
So for me, I agree with everything you said. I also think there's something about the human touch. So if I talk about the beginning of the pandemic, I've got a colleague who's also a friend who lives in Singapore. And I remember having a very naive, on my part, conversation with her, which was, well, are you going to go on holiday this year? And because Singapore was further ahead of the pandemic, she was like, absolutely not. We're not leaving the country. And I remember thinking, gosh, that's quite drastic. But it took a while for it then to move over to Europe. And now I was like, I got it now. Absolutely understood. And it was interesting, I then spoke to colleagues in the US who were doing the naive thing again of, well, I'm going to be living like this in the next few months. And it was like, you're not really. And for me, that's just one example. But for me, I'd always look at different people's views and insights as another source of getting data, different experiences that people have had, to ensure that you get a different perspective and a different viewpoint depending on what they do and where they sit in the world. So I think that's also a good insight to help broaden your perspective and knowledge.
And actually, that very point's interesting when you you talk about people in America. There are whole tranches of people in the States who are still disbelieving of the coronavirus. They still don't believe it's true. There was a story I'm sure you saw yesterday of a 35-year-old man who'd actually gone to a coronavirus party because he didn't believe it was a thing, and they were going to the party to see who could be the first person to catch coronavirus off the person who had it, who was throwing the party, and he died. And he died saying, "I think I was wrong," and that he didn't believe because the local media where he lived, I think it was one of the red states, the ones. Alabama or somewhere in that sort of neck of the woods, the local press was railing against the fact that they were going into lockdown again, and they needed the business to go, and so people were not really understanding the severity, and that becomes a political issue rather than a health issue. So yeah, I mean, it's, you know, you listen to what you want to believe to. And I think you graduate. I was watching about 3 weeks ago. I just happened to, on my laptop, I was looking at a news feed, and there was a picture of, I don't know if you remember, there was a group of people who were in Trafalgar Square, and they were there to protect the statues. They were there to protect Winston Churchill statues. They were sort of right-wing people. I thought, that's very on it. So I went and clicked on it, and it was live, and I thought, oh, maybe it's the BBC or someone, and it wasn't. It was Russia Today, RT, and of course I've heard of RT, but if you listen to the way they were commentating on it, it was a very different news feed for obvious reasons. And they have some great journalists on RT, but the fact that they had somebody with a live camera running there were people sort of shouting at policemen, but they were in the crowd watching it, and so it's possible to get a viewpoint from every different view, isn't it, whatever you're talking about.
Well, I mean, where you go for your chosen media, I suppose, you know, the opinion that you want to consume is important. And in the business that we run, the workshops that we try and moderate for clients, it's very easy to get sucked into the same old thought spiral. If you put a business into a room to talk about an issue, they will pretty much come up with the ideas they had yesterday. And this isn't being derogatory at all. It's just because the conversation is framed within a certain context. And before projects and during projects, before workshops, we always try and supply written material, not that we've written, but that we've bought from, you know, various newsstands or from other places for people to read. And it's not trying to get people interested in Angling Weekly or Caravan Club magazine or that sort of thing, but to give people the opportunity with a reason to read material that sits outside their normal frames of reference is really, really important and valuable. And, you know, in the same way that you, Brian, listening to the New York Times, we would suggest that, you know, maybe you should read Crochet Monthly just once, and maybe Courier Magazine once, to spread
all the time.
You know, I can see from your t-shirt. But to broaden one's attitude, I suppose, because although we think of ourselves as a very, you know, individually we're all very rounded and holistic in our thinking, we really aren't. You know, we consume what we consume. I think the current thought is that we consume on a daily basis about 300,000 words, which is a significantly sized novel every single day. Now, you may find that hard to believe, but, you know, the number of emails you read, the text you read, the billboards you might drive past, old-fashioned thing to say, the number of words you listen to and consume from YouTube or wherever else, you know, it soon adds up. And that's all stuff that's been pushed at you. That's how marketing is now. This intervention, the way that we're being intervened with on, is actually really hard very easy not to step out of. So consciously, we have to try and make it easy for people to step out of that groove and think a bit differently before we can get into an innovation project, which is what we do every day. So the discipline of reading something different. You know, I listen to Guardian podcasts and BBC podcasts and various other things as well from the States too. But now I'm thinking about it, I probably listen to the same 10 or 12 podcasts every single week. And I should change that up. And I will now. Thank you for
that.
I'm going to show my ignorance because I'm not a big football fan, but there is a body which Gareth Southgate sits on, which is how to improve the game of football at their level. And instead of surrounding it with the Harry Redknapps and the esteemed current players or previous players, they've put on people who've come from different ways of life, different experiences, to really challenge their thinking. And that's where they're starting to see results, because the game is improving, and the England squad did better performance in the last qualifying round. So it's again having that different people challenge what you're doing or thinking things through differently. And that's had great results as well. So I think if we're looking at business, we're going through challenging times, ask different people for their input, ask them to reflect. Don't go to the same people. It's like when you did your performance management, you wanted to get your end of year reviews, you could go and ask the people that you know will give you good reviews, or do you actually want to challenge yourself and ask the people you've had interesting experiences with over the course of the year and get their feedback, because that's when you'll truly learn and develop. I think we have opportunities.
I think following on from what Tristan was saying, I was really aware when Amanda and myself started working from home rather than in the office, and you've got this extra time because we're not commuting anywhere. I wanted to use some of it, so I started to look around to see what I could do with it. And we were talking about Hewitt before the meeting, Hewitt Jeans, and he's a bit of a hero of mine for what he did with Howie's and what he's doing with the Gene Company now. And he has something called the Do Lectures. And if you don't know what the Do Lectures are, anybody listening or you guys, go and have a look, because they're really, really, it's really interesting. And anyhow, he does some online courses, and I took a course on how you can branding that doesn't cost you a lot of money. For somebody who works in brand all the time, I thought something I should know about, and it's absolutely superb, brilliant course. But the reason I'm saying it, because as he goes through the course, he keeps introducing you to things you should read or things you should go and see. And one of the things he introduced the cohort to was something called Farnham Street, FARNAM, and it's this guy in America who has a blog, and it's brilliant. He has so many people writing on this, and they're writing on so many diverse things. And actually, it comes out, he sends it out every Sunday, and then there are various other things he does, and you get so hooked into it. Really clever writing. And of course, I wouldn't have known about that unless I'd thought about doing something different and going to this sort of lecture series. And I think it's learning to tumble with that flow once you get into it, and finding your way, with finding something new. And it's funny when we talk futures with our clients, and we go on to the brand bit, and we talk about their brand purpose and their story. Purpose is the way you're going to change the world. And you can see a lot of people struggle with how they get, what's branding got to do with stories. And you have to tell stories to bring things alive. We love stories, and a lot of people find it very difficult. And I think the more you read, the more you could start to be a bit more lyrical about how you go about things in life. You're very good at that, Tristan.
Thank you. I got some favourite books as well. I mean, one of my favourite books is a book called Story Branding, which is about exactly what you just said. Having a narrative that's got a start, a middle, and an end, and into the woods as well. The use of language. So when I write, which I do quite,
yeah.
So I write quite a lot and blog on my own platforms, and I don't necessarily think I'd sound quite as Edwardian and florid as maybe I'd like to, because my proofreader takes all that nonsense out for me. But it does become a bit of an exercise in expanding your lexicon, using the vernacular of a trade differently. And when we pitch to clients, one of the questions we get asked is, what are your credentials for being in the room today? And we routinely say to people, because this is the truth, we aren't expert in most of the company businesses that we go and sell to. We just can't be, because we're a small team and we
exactly the same here. Yeah.
So if we went into an aerospace room or a pharmaceuticals room or a knitting machine room, we're not going to know those things very, very well. But we do know the business of innovation process. That's our expertise. And frankly, if we go into any specialty business, they don't need more of themselves. They've got all that already. We are the naivety, the objectivity. We are the thought provokers, the nucleator for new thought ideas to occur. That's the value of putting someone like us in amongst that lot. So it's a bit of a hard thing. In addition to selling the future, which is never an easy thing to do, because going back to the start of this, well, what do you believe? Well, what do you have most faith? What do you have most faith in? What can you believe that you can do to make the future reflect your vision of it? Because you have to put a strategy together and then execute against it. But if we come into a room and throw some different ideas around, then of course the conversation has that opportunity. More of the same just gives you more of the same.
Yeah. You talk about culture a lot in your work, Rachel, and how culture is all the business has to have a strong culture at the right sort of time, and having an open mind in a culture is, in a business, particularly as managers, is really important, to actually interpret the messages that are coming to them all the time. I mean, you talk about that, don't you?
Yeah, and I think it's even more relevant now than it ever has been, because there's so much change, there's so much uncertainty. As leaders, how do you navigate your way through that? And the leaders I've been coaching, I was asked one of my leaders last week how they're feeling, use a metaphor about how they're feeling about COVID. And he said, it's like running a marathon, but they keep moving the finish line. And I can't stop. And so we just explored that metaphor. And it is, as a leader, how do you keep yourself going when we actually don't know when the finish line will be in this current scenario? How do you keep it going for yourself so that then you can create the right culture for your team, that they can keep going as well, and they can be creative and innovative and not worn out by all of this? I've just spoken to another client just now who's saying, I'm trying to make sure all of my team take a holiday, whatever form that takes. They need to have a break from work. They need to find to do something different so they can come back refreshed. So there's a huge amount of challenges. So I think the culture is even more important now, because you've got to set the tone, you've got to set the environment that enables everyone, including ourselves, to grow and thrive and just keep going, even if the winning line keeps moving.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've had talking of as you were talking, I was thinking of people we've known in the past, leaders that we've worked with, and quite often when we're doing the brand strategy part, or we're doing some of the workshops, and we're talking to them about the staff they're working with and bringing staff with them. So much, we've talked about this before, all three of us, in terms of brand is not, it's not just what goes out, what people see on the outside, it's what people feel on the inside. And talking to them about the communication internally. How do you manage and try and influence what people absorb in their lives, and what are the important channels that people are using? And it's really interesting, particularly with your favourite subject, Rachel, of the different generations in the workplace. If you've got a bigger business and they've got a cohort of millennials, you know, in there, they have no idea how they get their news, how they, you know, they wouldn't want to. I was talking to somebody this morning, somebody we know who runs a big business in Milton Keynes, and he's going through a particularly difficult time making a decision at the moment about if he's going to stay at work and have his office. And if he doesn't stay at work and has his office, how is he going to manage his team? He's going through all that thing we've talked about on this before. And I said, oh mate, I don't envy you that sort of. And he said to me, I'm looking at the email, it says, I feel like Sisyphus. Have you heard of Sisyphus? No, I had to look it up too. And he's the the guy who was condemned to push a boulder up mountain.
Oh yeah.
I had never heard of it before. But I thought, what a great metaphor. When you're pushing the boulder up and you get to the plateau and you realise it's only halfway up the mountain and you've got to keep going. And that's the way he described it. He felt like Sisyphus.
The dichotomy is that we've got the opportunity to go back to doing what we did before, or we can do something different. And frankly, most of us have got to do something different because that's the situation that we live in. I've got some friends who I've mentioned before a couple of times ago that they've just emigrated back to New Zealand. And of course, having got there, they're now back in a world where they can pretty much behave as they did here before COVID, because it's just not hit New Zealand yet. And New Zealand's being very good at clamping down on it. And you know, you have to say, listening to the Prime Minister, she's doing an awesome job for that country. Then you've got other opportunities. I call them opportunities because they kind of are. You know, in the UK at the moment, where social distancing is still very, very important to us. Long may that continue, frankly, because you know the shops aren't as busy and people are being very polite. They're giving you space on the pavement mostly. The people that come into our, you know, we have a number of businesses, and one of them is a pseudo retail outlet. And the people coming in here who don't recognise the new normal are the older generation. They just seem to think that it's not going to affect them. The ones that come out and want to buy something, they're going to come up and try and shake hands and get within 6 feet and all that stuff. And say, can you just step back now, please? Because this really isn't appropriate anymore. You know, I'm very happy for you to be here. We'll open the big doors at the front so there's some fresh air. We'll do everything we can to make it manageable, but you've really got to play your part. And I listened to a really, really interesting thing this week. It was on I think it was on it may have been the Guardian podcast again, actually, or it may have been the Corona cast that the BBC do, where they had people, not personalities, but perhaps people who have become quite famous or infamous through the course of COVID because they become commentators or specialists or experts, where they wrote a letter to themselves in January of this year. So July Tristan writes to January Tristan and tells him what's coming. Now, if you do that,
great idea.
And I'm going to do it for my next blog because I should have done it by now, actually, because I heard it on Monday or Tuesday. It's now Wednesday. Heavens, I missed one. But if you sit down and actually write down what you've had to change or how your life has had to change and how you've had to respond to different situations, even during the course of 6 months, you will find yourself looking at a litany of stuff. So last night I was having this thought about how I'm going to take this forward. And I keep a 5-year diary, just a few lines a day. And I often refer back to the same day last year to see what I was doing. And it's actually quite interesting. But of course, if you record the things that happen today, every day, or for the month of July, and then the month of August, and then the month of September, those little gradual shifts that are made for you and made by you amount to a huge change over the course of time. And I think that's the kind of information that people can trust because it's happened to them. And the only history we've got is our own history. So I think this is something that business leaders and everybody are going to have to take much more notice of, because the the way that it used to be was that things would drift, and innovation, if that's even a thing, happens to somebody else, and then we buy into it. Or, you know, Steve Jobs announced the Apple phone, the iPhone, back in 2008. It wasn't really an innovation at the time because it was a combination of three things. But how the infrastructure evolved to enable that thing to perform to its capacity, to its capability, has become the innovation that we've all enjoyed. And it's quite a complex thing to describe in a few minutes like this. I don't want to take over the conversation completely, but tracking what's changing for us as individuals and being able to look back even over the short period of time, I think will be a massively useful thing to do.
No, I agree. And I think what I find really fascinating right this minute is talking about tracking change, is the speed that it has changed so quickly over the last 3 months, over so many different areas. When you're a boss and you're running a company and your company is under threat in whatever way, and all our companies are under threat in some way or other because of what's happening, and you've got to then cope with, you know, the speed of technology change, the speed of cultural change. That's a lot of stuff to take on board at the same time, and to understand what other people are thinking about it, because there are so many people talking, and to disseminate, to have time to sit back. You know, we're talking about what's the truth. It takes some, you know, you do lots of executive coaching, Rachel. I mean, what are the people talking about? How do they process all this information that's coming at them when so much change is happening so quickly?
Funny enough, I've had a few clients increase the amount of time they talk to me, or there's more regular, longer, just so they get an opportunity just to download what they're experiencing, because there is so much change. There's a lot of frustration that there's no end in sight. So it could be, I'm going to be stuck at home for another 6 months. I miss the travel. I miss meeting the people. I miss my team. So there's lots that's just being processed, and it's the leaders I'm talking to, it's how do they continue to find that pace with so much change and trying to make sense of it so that they can then help their team. That's their biggest challenge, and it's having that.
So you're giving them time, you're giving them the opportunity to help process it.
Yes, if I go back to my client who is in this never-ending marathon, we worked through that, and it was really interesting because he determined that actually he's now in an ultra marathon, and therefore he needs to learn how to run differently. And then we talked about it's not normally just the runner, there's normally a support team. Who's your support team? Who's important to you? And then the other question was, do I have to win? Do I have to win? And I said, well, do you think you have to win? He said, yes. And I said, well, are you in the elite group? And he said, yes. And I said, well, interesting enough, I said, Usain Bolt never ran by himself. There was other people who would compete against him. Even though they knew it was highly unlikely, they still went for it. And so he realized it's okay to just run in it. So yeah.
I think there's lots of parallels, aren't there? We've got I don't know. I just happen to consume this stuff again because I'm interested in it. But in terms of going back to what Brian was saying about using some of the time, there are a couple of challenges going on at the moment, and one is the 25 press ups for 25 days. I forget which charity that's in aid of. There's also 30 minute for 30 days squat. So the Asian squat is a thing you just sit without chairs, basically, just going down on your haunches and stay in there. And as you get better at it, or over the course of time, you get better at it. And I've started running without shoes in fields. because I ran a lot anyway, but now I run without shoes because I figured it was better for me. And it does have its advantages and benefits, different story, different conversation. But you learn because you remind yourself that on the first day you go out and step on a thorn, that's quite a painful thing to do. And on the second day, you learn not to do that. So it becomes a bit of an easier process, and your joints adapt and you become more flexible and you run differently because you can't land on your heel. And, you know, so you not only do you change what you're trying to do, you change how you try to do it. And that may be just an illustration of what Rachel's talking about, but they do have parallels. And it's not, I think we anchor ourselves into what we know, going back to this personal history thing. We've been successful or not because of certain things we've done and certain things that have happened to us. And actually, all of that's moving all the time. And it's always been a marathon, and it's always been pushing the rock uphill. It's just,
but I wonder
the hill
whether,
may look a bit different.
Sorry, mate. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But I wonder whether we take enough time to look at our own behaviour and understand how it's changing. Because I'm certainly the way I live my life every single day now is changed how it was back in March. And even though I took that conscious decision to try and use the time I knew I'd have, some days I can't because we're busy, and some days we can. But I'm aware that my behaviour's changed. I'm aware that, you know, but I'm not quite sure I've quantified it yet. You see what I mean? Because you don't think about doing that, do you? You don't think about quantifying your own behaviour. Well, most people don't. And it's only through conversations like this that you suddenly sort of realise, I am doing things differently, and I think that, you know, Rachel's conversations with her executives are exactly that, aren't they? It's their chance to use you as a mirror.
Can I just stop you for a second? Sorry, I've got to pause the recording. Someone's at my front door. I'm sorry.